I'm often surprised by how there are few games that let you play as animals. You'd think more developers would be open to explore such a simple concept, but usually when they do, you're gifted with absurd powers and abilities which no normal creature could ever possess. Like enabling a shark to evolve so it can shoot lightning, or giving a goat unnatural control over gravity. Sure, games like these can still be fun, but not many developers are prepared to actually let you play as an ordinary animal thrown into an extraordinary situation. Most likely because it would force developers to think outside the box when designing their game world, which takes a level of commitment that most mainstream developers aren't prepared for. So when I heard that Blue 12 Studios were creating a next-gen title where you got to play as an ordinary cat stuck in a robotic-centric future, well, needless to say, I was excited. But even I wasn't prepared for all the surprises this game had in store for me. So let's talk about it. This is Stray. You are a cat. With no name or identity, simply an orange patch of fur to distinguish yourself from your fellow cats. As such, I've taken the liberty of naming our protagonist Garfield. Anyway, Garfield lives a pretty chill life with his family of cats, eating, sleeping, and drinking in the open air of a now desolate world, devoid of humanity and overrun by nature. But one day, while out exploring, Garfield accidentally falls into a dark ravine. It's here he stumbles upon an ancient city, populated by robots and ravenous creatures called Zurks. It's here amidst the darkness that he meets a robot called B12, who like you is a little lost and can't seem to recall who he is or where he came from. But with his help you're able to make your way to safety and soon arrive at a settlement populated by other robots. Though initially hostile, they do quickly soften up to you. So now with the residents' help, the two of you must find a way to escape this underground city and reach the surface, all the while being wary of the many horrors which now await you in the darkness. It's a pretty simple story, one which is told with a noticeable lack of dialogue. Sure, once Garfield finds B12 you're able to converse with other machines, which in turn gives the player the means to better understand this world and its people. But even then, a lot is left up to interpretation. The truth is, you're only ever presented with pieces of information during the dialogue, while details regarding the world itself are left up to the imagination, with B12's memory fragments being one of the few conclusive methods of learning the truth. Yet even that only goes so far. The narrative of Stray's world is like that of a puzzle, with the player being forced to piece together everything. It's a rather fitting way for the developers to tell their story, especially when you consider that you're playing as a cat. And yet, despite being incapable of speech, your feline protagonist and the robots he meets have a surprising amount of complexity, with plenty of twists and turns to be found throughout this relatively short story. You're bound to be surprised by how much depth can be found in this game's narrative. I know I was, especially since it's been backed up by some solid puzzles and platforming, all tailor-made for one very chaotic kitty. The basic setup for Stray's gameplay is pretty self-explanatory. Using your character's natural-born agility and feline grace, you're to traverse the many districts of this long-forgotten city, occasionally stopping to do cat-like things before continuing onward. From flooded streets to abandoned construction sites, dams, and other haunting locales, there will be plenty of unique locations for you to see in this game, with each of these distinct areas featuring their own hazards for you to deal with, while also being populated by either robots or the only other living creatures in the city, the Zurks. They might look like adorable little facehuggers, but make no mistake, they're just as terrifying. When there's one, there's usually hundreds more not far behind. So your only option when confronting them is to simply run like hell. They effectively serve as a living hazard, and you'll need to be precise in your movements in order to avoid their relentless assault. At a certain point you do gain a weapon that enables you to kill them, but due to its limited capabilities it's best reserved for emergencies only. Not to mention it only protects you from the Zurks you can see. So sadly for our feline protagonist, the best and most reliable solution when faced with conflict is to simply avoid it altogether. Thankfully as a cat you have all the tools you need to do so. Garfield is fast. Incredibly fast. Your running speed is far beyond anything the robots are used to, which comes in handy for getting around the game's world or avoiding danger. Furthermore, thanks to your small size and nimble stature, you're able to reach places that no human-sized robot can, which when combined with your speed enables you to traverse the environment at a frightening pace. It helps that the game's controls are so simple, that way you can simply focus on getting from point A to B without having to worry about specific button inputs. Still, what surprised me about the platforming was how often momentum and weight played a factor into it. Since Garfield is so small, you'd often need to consider which direction you move and how far you can move before your own weight can affect what you're standing on. Hell, there are many occasions where you need to use the weight of an object or your own in order to make a pathway. I won't lie, it's a lot of fun learning how to navigate this world. Constraining the player character to such a small form has effectively encouraged the developers to be more creative with how they design their levels. This is best showcased during the stealth segments, where once you could take the time exploring the world, now you'll be forced to find new ways to navigate your environment whilst avoiding detection from your enemies. As if this game wasn't scary enough, forcing the player to consider their movements more carefully without without having means to defend themselves, that's a perfect way to build tension. Of course, your game time isn't solely based around combat and stealth. Throughout the game, you'll be given the chance to explore the many settlements inhabited by various robotic characters. From here, you'll be given the opportunity to explore and solve a number of simple yet elegant puzzles. This is where the game really takes on a life of its own. As each settlement has its own culture and mysteries for you to solve, you'll need to think carefully in order to progress. I won't say that any of the puzzles are overly difficult, but some of them will require you to think outside the box, while others will simply have you asking, what would a cat do in this situation? You might think having a game this simple would ultimately result in an underwhelming experience for the player, but me personally, I was having a blast. With the controls easy to master and even a button dedicated to meowing, how couldn't you have fun with this game? Stray is an elegant little puzzle platformer that manages to pull off a rather absurd idea, that of giving the player control over an ordinary cat. Yet thanks to some well-designed levels and gameplay mechanics, there's not a single moment throughout this game that felt too absurd or unrealistic to ruin the experience. As a whole, it's a relatively chill game, with the most difficult parts coming from the many chase sequences and later stealth sections. Stray isn't a game that's going to beat you so hard it'll make you question your whole existence like Elden Ring, nor does it offer a vast world for you to explore like Horizon Forbidden West, but there's more than enough fun to be found in its story without forgetting its rather bleak undertones. The developers knew exactly what kind of game they were making for the player, and it shows throughout every inch of Stray's world. Composed by Jan Ver Kruisen, Stray's soundtrack is what I would consider to be simple yet sophisticated. It does a wonderful job of elevating the more tense and horrifying scenes, yet can relax the player at any given moment with its more melancholic tunes. This is a score which is perfectly tailored for a protagonist that's a cat, flowing gently during the quieter moments only to increase in tempo whenever the tension rises, all the while showcasing the decay of a once great society as a new world rises in its place, which when paired alongside a blend of natural and sci-fi based sounds allows Stray's world to truly feel post-apocalyptic. Yet it never goes so far as to horrify the player with its music or sound design. Despite how grim its setting might be, this is still a very lighthearted story. So much like the gameplay, everything is kept simple enough so that it doesn't detract from the narrative's tone, while also including enough unique and peculiar sounds to catch the player off guard, making you truly feel as though you're intruding upon a lost world begging to be explored, which when partnered with some stellar visuals results in a one-of-a-kind experience for the player, the kind that truly leaves you at a loss for words. As a game designed for next-generation consoles, it's unsurprising that it looks beautiful. From the way our protagonist first shifts and changes by the environment around him, to the chipped paint on our friend B12, there's all kinds of subtle little details that add an extra layer of realism to Stray's world. And yet, what often impressed me was how Stray effortlessly blended its realistic textures with the game's more unnatural visuals. Like how the robots you encounter are each made of different metals, yet due to their aberrant nature, they often cover themselves with varying kinds of fabric, adding to the idea of them imitating humans. But it goes even further than that. As fitting for an apocalypse, you'll see traces of nature engulfing this city, whether in the form of plant life or as a byproduct of the Zerg's corruption, effectively demonstrating that even the mightiest of man's creations can't stand against the natural order, while also serving to remind you of the outside world that your feline protagonist is trying to escape to. For a game where much of its story is told through its visuals, Stray manages to not just succeed, but set a new standard for indie developers in how far they can take cinematic games like this, leaving me hopeful that more developers might follow Blue 12 Studios' lead and try to create something as unique and genre-defying as Stray. In an industry filled to the brim with subpar platformers and cinematic titles that aren't as deep as some critics seem to think they are, it's nice to play a short yet fun game about a cat trying to find their way home. Stray is a title that relishes in its simplicity while also taking full advantage of the player character being a lovable feline, whether by causing some mischief in a town full of robots, or by giving yourself the opportunity to unwind by listening to some catchy synth music. Stray is able to accomplish all of this without having to erase any of its darker aspects. You're free to live out your dream of being a cat in a post-apocalyptic future. If only this game wasn't so short. There are so many questions that have been left unanswered, and the story's conclusion has only left me hungry for more of this breathtaking world. Plus, the sequel would allow them to expand upon the mechanics set up in this game, while also giving us a much larger look at this apocalyptic future devoid of human life. Safe to say there's a lot of potential to be found here, but until we get a proper follow-up to Garfield's adventure, for now I'm just gonna sit back, relax, and spend some time with my digital cat.